On Christmas night 1996, there had been a murder in the USA that shocked the whole world. A 6-year-old girl was found dead in the basement of her own house. A couple hundred people became suspects, including her parents and her brother. This mystery has remained unsolved throughout the last quarter of a century, even though a lot of people are sure that the girl's murderer is already known. On December 25, 1996, JonBenét and her parents went to celebrate Christmas to their friend's house. The celebration was a joyous affair. The children were having fun. They were entertained by a Santa Claus throughout the whole night. On the way home, the girl fell asleep in the car, and her father carried her to her bedroom. It was the last time her parents saw JonBenét alive. What happened next was a complete shock to everyone in their quiet and respectable city, and turned it into an epicenter of one of the most mysterious murders in history. On December 26th, JonBenét's mother woke up at 5 a.m. to get ready for their family trip to Lake Michigan. She came downstairs and saw a letter on the bottom stair. The note said that her daughter JonBenét was abducted and they needed to pay a $118,000 ransom if they wanted to see her again. It wasn't just a random sum of money. That's exactly how much the girl's father received as his annual bonus. Patricia ran into JonBenét's room, but she wasn't there anymore. She woke up her husband, who decided to call the police, even though the kidnapper's note stated they weren't allowed to do that. The mother started calling her friends, and a lot of them immediately drove to their place to give her the support she needed. The note said that the parents would be contacted in the next couple of hours, and they waited for the call with the police and their friends, but they didn't receive any calls. The letter, the main evidence, was handed from one person to the next. The police didn't stop this and didn't even search the Ramseys' house. They only told the parents to inspect all the rooms on their own and see if anything was missing. Only 7 hours after finding the note, Mr. Ramsey started inspecting the house and finally checked out the basement. That's where he found his daughter's body. There were 2 big hematomas on the girl's head, and there was blood on her clothes. Her arms were tied over her head with white shoelaces. After the body was found, the abduction case turned into a horrendous murder case. The police immediately started wondering, why did the murderer write a note demanding a ransom? Moreover, the letter was written on the ripped pages of Mr. Ramsey's notebook and took up 3 pages. It meant that the criminal was writing the note right in the house while the whole family was asleep. According to the police, he stayed in the house for about an hour. No one heard anything suspicious during that time, and no one woke up. Now here's the question. How did the murderer move JonBenét from her bedroom to the basement without making a sound and without leaving any traces behind? Soon after starting the investigation, the police admitted that they made a series of grave mistakes. The house wasn't properly scoured, and when the decision to do so was made, the responsibility fell to the father of the murdered child, John, and his friend, not the police officers. Some of the evidence could have been lost as a result, and the chances of solving the case while the trail was still hot dropped to 0. Initially, 2 versions of the events were brought up. Someone who could be either an unknown intruder or an acquaintance of the family broke into the house, or JonBenét's parents themselves were involved in the murder. After finding out that they became suspects, the wealthy couple immediately hired the best lawyers. John and Patricia took their lawyer's advice and refused to give any written statements, even though the investigators were hoping to use them to get an evaluation from clinical psychologists. They have a special method that helps them accurately analyze written statements of the witnesses and determine whether they were lying or telling the truth. All the further actions of the mother and the father were quite suspicious. They refused to be interrogated and said that they already provided all the information available during their unofficial conversations with the investigators. The deeper the detectives got into the investigation, the more suspicious the parents' testimony seemed. The mother told the police that she let her daughter's hair down and took off her dress before sleep, but the girl was found in exactly that dress and she was wearing 2 ponytails. And some pieces of a laureate wreath the girl was wearing during the Christmas celebration were found in her ponytails. Secondly, during the autopsy, some undigested pineapple pieces were found in the girl's stomach. That means that she ate about 4 hours before she was murdered. According to her parents, the last time their child ate was during the celebration at about 8 p.m. Why did she have pineapple pieces in her stomach then? The investigators also found a pineapple in the family's fridge, which caused even more suspicion. Thirdly, they left some of the windows in their house and their door open for the night. Why didn't the parents lock everything? Maybe they unlocked everything only after the murder to mislead investigators. Shortly before the murder, John and Patricia gave the keys to their house to lots of people, their friends, relatives, the staff, allegedly to let them take care of the house during the vacation the family was going to leave for in the near future. And finally, one more weird moment. The girl's mother was forced to get her handwriting analyzed to compare her handwriting with the one in the ransom note. The detectives concluded that the woman purposefully changed her handwriting. Later, it was discovered that the note was actually made with the use of a typewriter. That typewriter hasn't been found to this day. The investigators also suggested that JonBenét could have been killed by her father. The man was taking antidepressants for a while, and the police theorized that he could hit the girl in a fit of anger. Thinking that she was dead, he could make it look like she was murdered by some stranger. This is where the ransom note comes in. Perhaps the parents wanted to try to mislead the investigators and were hoping that the police wouldn't scour their house. And after realizing that the search was unavoidable, he pretended to find his daughter's body. While the parents remained the main suspects, they took part in a TV show, gave interviews, and even had time to publish a book titled The Death of Innocence, in which they allegedly shared everything they knew about the murder of their daughter. The investigator, Steve Thomas, who was working on the case, also published a book about it. It was unclear what their motivation was, but every year, someone continued to profit off of what happened to JonBenét. The girl's parents also sued 2 publications who suggested that they were the ones who murdered their daughter. They managed to get $4 million in a lawsuit, and the public saw it as yet another attempt to make money out of the tragedy that happened to their daughter. In the meantime, the detectives were looking into one more theory connected to beauty pageants. The police thought that the girl's popularity could attract someone who decided to find out her address and murder her. This line of investigation was way more complicated because the number of potential suspects could be estimated as thousands. That's why the police didn't manage to get any further information in regards to this. The investigators were basically stumped. The parents were actively profiting off their dead daughter's name. Any hope to find out the truth was getting smaller with each passing year. But then, at one point, everything changed. At first, it should be said that the girl's mother died from ovarian cancer on June 24, 2006. 2 months later, something unexpected happened. A man named John Mark Carr, who was completely unknown to the police, suddenly confessed to killing JonBenét. He said that he saw the girl during one of the beauty pageants and fell in love with her. The man collected her photos, newspaper articles, and also dreamed of writing a book about her murder. The police started to think that one of the most known cases was finally solved, but alas, Carr turned out to be innocent. How is that possible? To this day, no one knows why he decided to take the blame. Some psychologists think that some people pathologically crave constant attention. Admitting to killing someone is the easiest way to get that much-needed attention. Others think that Carr got so invested in JonBenét's story and thought about her so much that he lost touch with reality. His fantasies and the actual reality mashed together in his mind, and he actually started to believe that he was the one who killed the girl, even though he never even met her. He couldn't remember any important details when he was asked about that night, couldn't make sense of his own words, and had no idea how the girl's house even looked. But it's not even the most important thing. The police found out that he wasn't even in the same city the night the girl was murdered. He himself never explained why he took the blame. In 2008, the case was updated. The DNA test showed that the blood that was found on JonBenét's clothes didn't belong to any of the girl's relatives. It turned out that it was some unidentified man's blood. His DNA sample was run through the FBI's database of genetic material belonging to criminals, but it didn't provide any further information. There were no updates on the case for a while, but then something interesting happened. In 2016, Burke, the victim's older brother, gave an interview for the first time. According to him, JonBenét's murder was connected to the beauty pageants where some unknown criminal spotted the girl. Now, we're going to talk about another theory that concludes that the girl was killed by her brother. Supporters of this theory think it could happen two different ways. Burke could accidentally push the girl or do something else that resulted in severe head damage and caused her death. This theory isn't very believable because in this case, there was no reason to hide the accident and involve the parents in all of the lying that would be needed afterwards. The second theory is much more believable. Burke could purposefully severely injure his sister to kill her. In this case, it's obvious why the mother and father were so involved in hiding the truth about this crime. They already lost one of their children and didn't want the life of the second one to be ruined. Why would Burke murder his own sister? Supporters of this theory think that his main motivation was jealousy. After she was born, the older brother became less important to their parents, and her successful career that resulted from participating in beauty pageants only drew more attention to her. He could have been nursing his hurt feelings for years before doing something about it. This theory also raises multiple questions. Her brother was only 9 years old at the time. Was he actually able to do something that could result in the girl's death? And how could their parents forgive him after that? In 2019, the case was suddenly updated again. A 54-year-old criminal, Gary Oliva, who was in prison for possessing content featuring children, admitted to murdering JonBenét. Oliva was the main suspect from the moment the investigation started. The police searched his car at the time and found a taser and poems about JonBenét, but they didn't find any evidence that could prove that he was the murderer. On December 26th, the night of the murder, Oliva called his school friend Michael Whale and said, "I heard a little girl." Whale tried to get more information out of him but didn't succeed. He called the police after that and told them everything Oliva shared with him, but he didn't know what happened next and had no idea if the police actually did something. After 2016, when Oliva was already in prison, Whale received letters from him in which he admitted to murdering JonBenét and added, "I admitted to killing JonBenét and also told them about other children I assaulted, harassed, and abused countless times. I signed lots of agreements with the court representatives in regards to this. I'm a serial killer. I have a mental disorder and I can't control it. I told the detectives about all the crimes I committed, all the murders, everything I could remember, and they wrote everything down, but they can't prove any of those murders." It seemed like the murderer was finally found after all those years, but this story is also quite complicated. First of all, a whole year passed after his confession. No one really talked about it anymore. He wasn't accused, even though Oliva's first confession was a known fact basically right after that fateful night. Second of all, the criminal said that he was in love with the girl and didn't want to murder her. She allegedly tripped and fell, smashing her head. This raises a question. How exactly were the events of that night unfolding if neither the parents nor the brother heard her fall? If the girl fell, we can theorize that she tried to run. Why didn't she scream? Why didn't she call for help? Even if she tried to run without making any sounds, which is extremely unusual for a child, the sounds of footsteps, struggle, and her falling would still be heard throughout the whole house. But that's not all. The forensic analysis showed that the head injury was most likely caused by some heavy object, and Oliva said that the girl simply fell. In my opinion, this theory about Oliva's involvement is completely unfounded and inconsistent. One of Britain's biggest publications, the Daily Mail, blew up the criminal's confession, saying that the case was solved. But the case remains unsolved to this day. All of these sensationalist claims made by the newspaper look like a simple desire to attract attention to themselves and profit off one of the most mysterious murders. There's one more fact that works against Oliva's involvement. Do you remember that window the criminal could use to get into the house? It was all cobwebby, and it was impossible for a grown man to get around the cobwebs. The lawyers hired by the girl's father suggested a really strange theory. In their opinion, spiders' webs consist of a very elastic substance, and it could go back to its original form even after someone went through it. Moreover, the girl was murdered on December 26th when there was snow in the yard, but there were no traces leading either to the window or other places that could potentially let the intruder in. Taking all of this into consideration, we can say one thing. This crime is one of the most complicated and contradictory crimes in history. All the theories have inconsistencies and flaws, but what theory sounds the most believable? After analyzing all the details of this case, I came to the conclusion that the theory about the girl's brother is the most believable one. A lot of different facts prove that it was impossible for some stranger to get into the house without any traces. An intruder wouldn't be able to commit this crime without being heard, move the girl to the basement, and leave. If we omit all the theories about strangers, we have 3 suspects. Obviously, a 9-year-old boy couldn't possibly fake an abduction on his own. If the brother is the murderer, then the parents are without a single doubt involved in hiding the truth. Now there's only one question. If it was the brother, did he want to kill her? Or did he just fail to calculate his strength, hit the girl on the head with something and murdered her that way? In my opinion, this was indeed a tragic accident. The brother was most likely jealous of his sister's widespread popularity, couldn't bear it any longer, and lost his temper. And when it comes to the parents participating in faking the abduction and misleading the investigators, there's one more thing to add. Long before all of this, JonBenét's father lost his daughter from his first marriage in a car crash. If Burke really accidentally killed his sister, the father had to make a really difficult decision on December 26, 1996. Ruin the life of his now only child, or extensively lie to cover everything up. If we assume that this theory is true, it would mean that the girl's death wasn't an accident because in this case, Burke's only punishment would be going to a psychologist for a period of time. And if he purposefully wanted to hurt her, the American justice system would come up with something else for him. He most likely wouldn't get an actual sentence, but he would have to live his life as a known and documented murderer. It's basically impossible to come to any conclusions in regard to this story. We can only theorize about what happened that fateful night. The theory about the brother's involvement seems like the most logical one, but we can never be 100% sure. And what do you think? Who actually murdered JonBenét Ramsey?